Yeah, thank you very much for the kind invitation. I'm first time here in Bratislava, and as far as I know, the weather is beautiful, the people are very nice and friendly, and I hope I can do my best to make nearly a similar impression to you. First, I have to excuse my very German English. I hope you will take that as it is. And the paper I gave, and I gave it first to the organizers in German, is what the topic is all about, very abstract. So it is about how Habermas is and was dealing with the concept of human rights during the whole period of his oeuvre. The astonishing thing for me, and I found it out only as it happens that one reads an early article of Habermas again. The astonishing thing is that he started, let me just start here also. So the funny thing is that he started very early in the theoretical discussion with human rights. In his very good article, Natural Law and Revolution, Naturrecht und Revolution, from 1963. It was published as one of the articles in Theory and Practice. And what is very interesting is that he was discussing human rights just from the beginning in a way he is still now discussing human rights. And by this he is very different to, let's say, the mainstream discussion of human rights, at least in philosophy. The mainstream is that most philosophers think, oh, human rights is very interesting, but what our philosophers are all about is, are they justified? So you find a lot of books about the justifiable or justification of human rights, and by this human rights are very much taken as moral rights. And I'm a little bit also critical to this approach. I think in the end, these people and scholars only discuss human rights as moral duties. So that the relation to right, of course, is a duty. So that is always the case. But what rights make so specific that we change from a game of interactive duties to each other to a game where some have rights and others by this have duties. That is not really understood as a specific thing. So, and I will go to this, but the interesting thing is that Habermas was looking to human rights just in the beginning from a political point of view. So he was discussing different declarations of human rights in Virginia and in France, and he wrote a very marvelous article by the distinction of the different sorts of declaration in United States, in Virginia and in France. One is more common orientated, and the France is much more revolutionary, you think. But they are still a part in a political action, in the founding action of a state. By this new states, new democrats gives themselves a constitution, and human rights are declared as a part of this constitution. So just from the beginning, human rights were legal rights. They were politically declared by a legitimate law-giving assembly, constitutional assembly, and of course they claim that they could be morally justified. But that is, let's say, the third aspect of human rights. So first, they are legal rights, they have to be established in a political decision-making process, and then of course they claim that they could be morally justified. And the moral justification in the former times were, of course, natural law theories, or if one goes to Kant, Kant's reason, also not natural law, but reasonable law theory. And that changed after the Second World War. The declaration of the Second World War, after the Second World War in 1948, was not at the same time state-founding political action, because there were already states, and representatives of these states came together and declared the general, Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So by this, there's a problem, but still they were declared as a part of international law, or law of people, in German Völkerrecht, not as a part of specific constitution of specific states. So they have a different meaning. So I think one has to distinguish between the meaning of human rights in general before the Second World War and after the Second World War. Because after the Second World War, it's obvious that human rights are a result of international agreements between states, and therefore from this on they limitate, of course, the sovereignty of particular states who take part in the international contracts of then later human rights international pact in the 60s and 1966. We have two main pacts about political and freedom rights and about social rights, cultural rights, and economic rights. So then, of course, you have a lot of other convenience on the international level. So, but by this, one has to ask, what is the difference between the understanding of human rights as moral rights and what follows if you understand them as juridical rights that are politically declared and morally justified? I think if you see human rights only under a moral perspective, then of course you are talking of rights in a very weak sense. Because normally rights in a legal system, in an established legal system, you are able to go to a judge if your right is not fulfilled. The judge can order police, say legitimate power, to force somebody else to fulfill the corresponding duties that follow from your rights. Then of course you also can say, hey, because I'm the bearer of the right, I free you from the fulfilling of the related duty. Maybe that not with all rights possible, but in general we think that. So these rights are strong rights because they are combined, as Kant were defining the concept of right, as combined with the legitimate opportunity to force, of coercion, others. And then of course Kant says this coercion is legitimate because it forces an illegal coercion somebody else did against me. See, so that was Kant legitimate, but maybe we have better legitimization for this, but this was the idea. If you are talking only about moral rights, then you only can appeal to the public, that those who are the addressees of the corresponding duties should fulfill their duties and obligations. There is no third institution that can force the others to fulfill their duties. You only can say shame and blame the others who don't fulfill. So moral rights are weak rights in this sense. They are very often in specific situations, politically speaking, very strong and important rights. Because if you are a member of a state that has in its constitution no basic rights, no human rights, and you are fighting for your rights. Let's say women are fighting for treated equally, or others are fighting for, let's say, free speech, or for the freedom to build up trade unions, because that are also specific human rights. Then, of course, you can say, hey, I not only say you have the duty to do this and this, because it's injustice or it's violation of my my dignity or something. You can say, hey, I have the right. I claim that I have the right. So right in this sense, I claim rights, and you say, and then you say also, and these people say, because I have the rights, it's up to me that you have to fulfill the duty. They're not like under the Zingebot, under the 10, what is it?
Commandments.
Commandments. The 10 Commandments, sorry, I didn't know the English. So because then you say only because God was saying that we are all under the same duties, have the same duties. So the direction of the fighting for others to fulfill their moral duties is different. You say it's up to me, and therefore with this, even if this weak concept of moral rights, you have the opportunity to develop a self-estimation, a self-respect. Because now you feel that yourself equal with all the others as a person that has rights. So if a person has rights, I think we establish a second institution coming up to moral institutions. So we have a moral community, but in legal communities we have specific conditions to become a member of a legal community. You must be a recognized member of the community. Therefore, animals and teapots are not a member of the legal community, you see? And sometimes we say, hey, you are not a member of my legal community because you are an Austrian and I am in Slovakia. So the problem with the legal communities is that there are particular communities. And of course, human rights claim to be universal and equal to all human beings. So therefore, from the moral point of view, one can say, what is the condition that somebody is a bearer of human rights? He has not to be a member of a specific state, not to have a specific citizenship. It's just enough that he is a human being. Then, of course, we discuss if embryos are human beings in this sense, and so, but that's a second discussion. You see? But if you are the bearer of legal rights, then you must be a recognized member, a citizen of a legal system, of a particular legal system. Of course, then you can say, hey, I'm not only a citizen of Slovakia or of Germany, I'm also a European citizen. Meaning you have a transcending state, transcending citizenship. And then, of course, as Kant also already said, why should there not only be a global citizen? Weltbürger, a cosmopolitan citizenship. But what is the meaning of a cosmopolitan citizenship? Is there a difference to just be an object of moral respect? So it's not so clear what is the status of. So and that I think that are the problems that Habermas takes by using and making the decision, hey, I understand right as legal rights, and therefore human rights are legal rights, and then of course the main problem is that this legal system are particular system, and so there's a tension between the universal claim of human rights. Habermas, as I see or reconstruct what he was doing, and now of course it becomes very abstract, and I won't go in detail to different points. If you want to ask me, I can try to do it. In the paper I did a little bit, I wrote other papers more specific to some peculiar or specific points. But here I think it is just for the case of discussion enough to see how he tries to solve the tension between universality and particularity, between the moral and the legal political dimension of human rights. The first approach is in his famous book Facts and Norms, Faktizität und Geltung, that is 1992, so 30 years later than the first. And that of course is also at least specific for German, but also I think for Anglo-American discussion. Human rights were not the topic, a subject of philosophical discussion for a long time. So for me, I started in Germany, maybe I just make this remark, after maybe there was a burning of asylum people in Rostock, former DDR. That was the beginning of the 80s, I think 1983, I guess, I think 20 years ago now. And then we was assistant in Berlin, and we say, hey, what is it? That's a fight between human rights and citizen rights. And therefore said, okay, then that's an interesting topic. And then by just looking to it, I found it so interesting that I worked and still are working on human rights. So this tension between universality and the particular legal meaning, Habermas tries first to solve by just saying that human rights and popular sovereignty imply mutuality. So they say they are in relation to each other. You can't have the one without the other. That, of course, does not really solve the problem, but it's so the first step to solve the problem. And by this, of course, he says, by starting from the political point of view of human rights, let's say the Republican meaning of human rights are that the bearer of human rights are not only the bearer of human rights, they are also the authors of human rights. And the authors not only in the sense that particular human rights are created by a democratic law-giving system, but also that what human rights are in general is a creation of the citizen of a specific state. So if you create a new constitution, there is always, and I think you solve the same problem in Slovakia and with a lot of other states after the breaking down of the Soviet Union regime, then the people are discussing what should there be a part of, then the technical term is basic rights in the constitution, because these rights are, let's say, first order rights, and they regulate second order rights and equal and other spheres of rights, and so those are very important. And then, of course, we have different construction how to deal with this. The English don't have a constitution, written constitution, they don't have basic rights explicitly, but implicitly. And I think most of the new foundation of states now have, just by a decision of the constitution-making assembly, part of basic rights. And by this, of course, they say, hey, we want a constitution, in this itself is binding to some interpretation of what human rights are. And then, of course, not all human rights of the General Universal Declaration are part of the Grundrechtsteil, of the basic rights part of Constitution, so that is up to historic decisions and so on, and also it's changeable. You can either cut it or you can enlarge it and so on. How much time do you have?
15 minutes.
Oh, okay. So, by this, I think that is very important, that Habermas, and I think by this one could say, he, at least in the beginning, he is in favor of a republican understanding of human rights. So those who are the bearer of the rights are also the author. That's Rousseau's understanding of political autonomy, and Habermas is using it, you know it, with this distinction between private and public autonomy. But the idea behind this is, if you are a bearer of human rights, and you see, the funny thing is that you are against the conception that there is either a natural law that gives you human rights somewhere else, or that God gives you human rights, or a very good philosopher, a moral philosopher, let's say John Locke or Kant wrote a very convincing book. I think, hey, that's so convincing, okay, then I have human rights. No, I don't have human rights by this approach when there is a good moral justification for it. It is only a public reason to put it in the lawmaking process, but it is not by themselves that now human rights exist. A lot of philosophers in some quotation Habermas also saying that human rights exist because they are morally justified. I think that is behind his own approach. The position who is arguing this way is the traditional liberal one. the liberal thinks, okay, we have pre-constitutional rights, natural rights, reasonable rights, morally justifiable rights, and a lot of them are discussing in this way. And then they say if there is a law-giving process by a constitutional giving assembly, then this political process has to be under the rule of this preconditional rights. So, constitutional rights, pardon. So therefore, you have an external limitation of what is legally justifiable to do in the political sphere. You see? And then, of course, also democracy is not sovereign in this sense that it can create the laws the sovereign wants to create. No, no. Under a liberal perspective, it has to fulfill the more general, abstract, external norms who are coming from morality and who are, let's say, articulated in a catalogue of natural rights or then human rights. So that's different. Habermas is saying that's wrong. And therefore he wants to say there has to be some inner connection between popular sovereignty and human rights. Okay, I explained this difference so that if you start with universality, then every human being is, so who is a member? And so also in his first, and then but also in facts and norms, Habermas is starting by saying that the bearer of human rights has to be a citizen. A citizen, so it's a little bit unclear what sort of citizen it is. Is it a citizen of a particular state, or is it a global citizen? You see, from the universal point or understanding of human rights, then there should be a global citizenship. But what is a global citizenship? We are not really sure. We don't know what it is. You see. Of course, we can explain now and later on, but so for the first step. So the main and the paradigm to understand what citizenship is the citizenship of a particular state. And by this, of course, as you already know, states claim that they can give their membership, the condition for the to get their citizenship by themselves. That's a traditional, let's say, power of a sovereign state to decide by itself who and what are the conditions to become a member of our state. So we get citizenship so and so. In Facts and Norms, he, let's say, developed this first step, first approach in a more than differentiated way by saying that there is a co-originality, Gleichursprünglichkeit, a topic which comes from Heidegger. So that of course, its original philosophy is always a very funny sort of philosophy, but because if you have a source of something, you see what comes out, but you don't know what is behind, what makes a source to be a source, so that something comes out, you see. So, and that also is, you see, if you are using this metaphoric picture for describing what happens if you make a constitution, you say, hey, what a constitution is, I see when there is already a constitution. But the constitution could not rule those who build up the constitution, because that's a pre-constitutional state. So what happens in this pre-constitutional state? Historically, a lot of violence happens. We have a lot of constitutions which are, let's say, concrete built up by violence, by illegal violence, not by agreement and discussion. You see, sometimes people try to do it, but of course in this building up process of constitution, you get a lot of political compromises, a lot of illegal violence also, who is distinguished and determine then the specific, let's say, structure of the constitution and things like that. So if one talks about co-originality, there is always an open, let's say, a dark point, and you have to do something more to this point. But first I will go to his explanation how to understand, how one can understand this theory of co-originality. He thinks that, and that I think is the main important concept in this area, he thinks that the human rights are now an enabling condition, ermöglichende Bedingung, enabling condition for the political process. Maybe I can explain it a little bit, so there are a lot of other aspects as well. So if you want to take part in an election, let's say American election yesterday, you are very interesting. You have the best arguments to vote somebody. But that doesn't give you the opportunity and the legal possibility to vote. You see, you only can vote in this way when you are a recognized member and so on and so on, and not also recognized member, you also need to have the right of voting. Because if you are too young, maybe you are a citizen of the United States, but you cannot vote. Or maybe if they're by judge say you lost your citizen rights, maybe also voting is not allowed for you. So that's different. So by this, of course, he says one has already a structure of bearers of rights, and the citizen gives themselves these rights. They recognize each other as bearers of rights, and only under the condition that they are bearers of rights, they can proceed in the political opinion-making and decision-making processes. Otherwise not. Otherwise you are very interesting but outside. You see? So therefore, and then he says that is mean it enables people to take part in this process, to be the author of the law and of the specific rights and so on. Therefore he says if human rights are enabling conditions, they could not be limitations. And then of course there was a discussion, others, Höfe and my friend Stefan Gosepat, and myself also say that this distinction, this opposition between limitating conditions, external limitation, like in the liberal understanding of human rights, and enabling condition, human rights in the Republican sense, that this opposition is not so that you have either you have the one and then you don't have the others. I think there is a possibility to combine both. So you have at the same time an enabling aspect and a limitation aspect. And by this, the theoretical term to make it clear is self-commitment or self-binding. And I think if a democratic state in its constitution says that we want to have in our constitution a basic rights part, so we want to have that there are some human rights are part of our constitution, they bind themselves, they commit themselves to the fulfilling of these rights. So, as you already know, then you have, let's say, we could say, and I just go very quick to this part, we have maybe three models to understand this self-committing effect of human rights. First, we could say we have a constitutional court. So the constitutional court, the dividing political powers, is controlling parliament and is controlling government if they fulfill the general norms of the constitution. Like in Germany, we had now very famous decisions of our constitutional court against what Parliament just decided and against what the government wants to us to do or to fulfill. So that's very interesting. But of course, the Constitutional Court is not the last instance. The last instance in this game is always public opinion. Because then, of course, if the Constitutional Court makes a decision which is not so plausible, there is a lot of discussion in the public, and then people try to change it. Either the government or the Parliament makes a new law, or we change the constitution and things like that. And only Germans have a constitution which says you can't change some parts of the constitution. But I think that's wishful thinking. Modern constitutions are constitutions where you can change every part. And it doesn't matter what is. So in the DDR constitution was standing that the friendship with Soviet Union is eternal. It just was a want. Okay. So the second model is that, of course, is much more complicated. That Habermas says the tension between universality and particularity is built in the process of political opinion and decision making by what he calls deliberation. So if we have a political public which there is some reasonable deliberation and argumentation, we can say, even if it very often is not the case, it claims to be rational, it claims that there should be some sort of argumentation that could convince other people, or the majority of people, and things like that. So this deliberation process has first this quality, as he said, that it tries to become a rational agreement. And second, this deliberation process is a procedure. So you have formal structures to allow the political public open, more or less rational discussion just by regulating formal structures. So very important is, of course, the right of free speech, the right of public assembly and things like that, but also some others. I think that's very interesting. Habermas was criticized by this approach by saying that's too formal, and there should be also some content, some substance in it. And I think by, let's say, reacting to this arguments against this approach, he in the last years develops a more interesting concept of human dignity. And then he says, and you just were quoting this article where he said that human dignity is a moral source of human rights in history, which of course is a little bit difficult, but I think in the end he is right in this idea about this, but one has to explain how it works. But because, and I think the most important thing is that he says, we can explain what human dignity means to establishing or formulating human rights by looking to cases where human dignity is violated. So that's a negativistic approach by saying, because we are all over the place, all over the world, we are much more similar in our understanding or evaluation of what is a violation of dignity than what is dignity positive. So, but by this, I think one can try to make sense of this approach. And now the last, which of course should be an extra lecture itself, is that Habermas is saying, okay, if we are, because till now he tries to, let's say, to force, to strengthen the universal moral claim of human rights from a more or less moral point of view. So all the models I was discussing till now are approaches to get in morality, to get morality, universal morality, into the structure of law and of legal processes. The other way to get the same result is to strengthen, to universalize the legal structure. Therefore, cosmopolitan, and of course what is called constitutionalization of international law. And therefore he is now very much engaged politically now mostly, and he is using Europe, constitution for Europe, he was very much engaged for this by saying that could be a model for a global constitution. Maybe we can't take it point by point, but that is an experiment, and we can learn how to get a transnational constitution with different states. And the last, maybe then I end, the last proposal he makes in this essay, The Future of Europe, is that he says, we split the basis of legitimacy of the constitution. We say in this constitution, giving process, we have two sources of power. First, the individuals, and that is relating to human rights. But then also the states. And then he says, if we have some imagination of a world parliament, that should be a world parliament in which the global citizen play two roles. First, the role of the particular state, the state citizenship, and then the role of a more global citizenship. And I think that is very interesting, but to discuss it one has to go in more details, and I think I should stop. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So now there is a time for your questions or comments. Ms. Georg is the first.
Yeah, I'm interested in the case you brought up about the was it the immigrants who were being attacked in Rostock? I don't remember exactly what the case was, but in which you pointed out that citizen rights were opposed against human rights. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if either you could reflect, or if Habermas reflected on that tension that goes on, and also in light of nowadays it's most often talked about in terms of immigrants and citizens against immigrants, but there's a long history of male voters against women or slaves, or now in this part of the world you can hear people talk about how Roma are violating our rights, the rights of proper citizens, how citizens' rights.
That's a very good question, also more concrete than this abstract thing. In the paper I just mentioned this part a little bit, but I think Amos would say, and I can follow it here, that after the Second World War, we have first that we establish a new sort of rights, social rights, and which were first traditionally binding to citizenship. Marshall, an English sociologist, wrote a famous book by showing this, and then by establishing more and more in the 60s the international regimes of human rights. A lot of states agreed that even non-citizens who live in their country are the bearer of rights. And therefore, like it is already in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and later on, in the international pacts and treaties, nations say we recognize every human being as a bearer of rights, as a principal subject of law. But if you are a subject of law, you are only, let's say, half a citizen. You are only what Kant was saying, Rechtsgenosse, meaning that you are only the bearer of rights, but you are not the author of the laws that gives you the rights. So, therefore, the main problem with immigrants is, of course, in some states, they don't have even not all the rights they should have just by recognizing them as the bearer of, or subject of rights, subject of law. But this, of course, it means that they have a name, that they are registered. You see, that they are official members of the state. Like, for instance, in China, after the one-child policy, we have, I think, about 30 million people, first children, then of course now it is people, which are not officially registered. So they are not there officially. They are not subject of law. You see? Then of course I would say that's a violation of their human rights. And Chinese Republic has agreed to this treatment, so they of course should try to solve it. And also in Africa we have a lot of parts. So that is one problem. The other problem is that those who are immigrants, also illegal immigrants in states, they only have, let's say, officially or formally specific rights, meaning they could not be tortured by police. They could not be arrested arbitrarily and things like that. And normally they can, sometimes they can work, sometimes not, so that is different, you see? But what they lack is the right to fight for their rights and fight against the violation of their rights before law. So sometimes they have, let's say, formally rights, but they are very suppressed by the opportunity to really to fight for them. So that, of course, they have, let's say, in the books they have rights, but in reality these rights have no really worth to them. And then, of course, the third point is the right for voting, which still is a traditional right that is combined with citizenship. And now we have a discussion, shall we split either citizenship and voting? And saying, okay, we give those a right to vote who are not a citizen of our state, but who are persons who live very long here. Habitants, I think sometimes they say. So there's what all you say, we minimize the condition for becoming a citizen. So you're saying, okay, those who are living and working here for 2 years or for 8 years, I think Swiss is 8 years or something, or 12 years or so, or otherwise you have a lot of money, then you can shorten this time. You see, you can make a deal, and then you just become in a month. So you, okay, that's up to what states are traditionally could do. But nowadays there's also a movement to say, and very also in philosophy of course, but also on the legal level and political level, that states are also in this losing their traditional understanding of sovereignty. So at least the conditions to become a citizen should fulfill general rules, and we have some international treatments also who specify what sort of rules should there be applied.
So there is another question, Jürgen.
Well, thank you very much. Really interesting. I used to work for the United Nations, and I know how important was the human rights agenda in many issues. And I think it has done a lot of good, because then at least you know where the human rights are violated in that respect, taking a negative kind of approach. But I think that this moral side has been a little bit underestimated, and I just learned that Habermas sort of moving box, because we know that in many countries, non-democratic de facto institutions, human rights are enshrined. So you have the right to communicate and civil rights, all kinds of rights, but they're not enforced. And contrary to the West, when, as Habermas says, that having norms and values, and when norms become values, then you have sort of. But in this case, I think that the cultural and moral aspect is being difficult to handle, because I remember when you issue a human rights book and then you try to illustrate how human rights have been implemented, then you put cultural guise, so you put national clothes so that people understand that sort of culture and local. And this is when Habermas talked about private and public and the difficulty, community, individuals, and deliberation with democracy, but he talks about very procedural kind of and realistic. But this cultural side and socialization of human rights as moral values, which would become normative, could be done through community. And I'm just wondering whether his concept of deliberation could be viewed more flexibly and applied not just kind of constitutional, very regular and formal, but to communities, kind of conversational democracy when people discuss now issues everywhere, and how applicable that would be, whether that could play a role in making those values, not just human rights, more normative aspect, at least within communities. There are many communities, of course, ethnic and other.
I mean, very good question, but of course, very complicated question also. So, and you have to say stop. But I think first from Habermas' point of view, I think, as you already said, he would try to solve this by the specific structure of deliberation. And of course, deliberation for him is the way in which universal morality, so that's some sort of Kantian universal, equal respect and concern to all, you know, even by this discourse ethics. I mean, that's a core structure. See? I think so that is established in the public discourse as reasonable arguments for political decision making. You see? So his argument is not that if you have a moral argument, then everything is fine. The argument is, and then of course maybe his role as intellectual also, we are using this sort of moral argumentation to strengthen our fight for good solution of these structures and so on. And by this, of course, we are criticizing those, as he calls it, cultural impregnations, or so, which are cultural, peculiar, and particular, and violate the universal claims. So, for instance, if it comes to equal rights of women in public, in clothing, or in taking part in sports, schools, or swimming and things like that, of course. You see, then you have to discuss. First you can say, okay, we have a very good established tradition of dealing with daughters and women in this way, and that is very famous for us, and we love it, all loves it, and we like it, and of course the old man likes it more, and things like that. And then of course there has to be a public discussion, but if there is not a public discussion, then of course this sort of questions are just decided by those who are in power, and then it's still open to argumentation, opposition, and things like that. So the deliberation process presupposes that there is a function public discussion, and if not, then of course something else. And so I think by this, of course, it's very important that human rights theorists don't give up the moral claim of human rights. Like, for instance, Richard Rorty and others say, nowadays also Bites, says, oh, human rights are just a political agreement, and we don't have to justify it. So you just, and I think people nowadays, they want to be, not to be manipulated, they want to be convinced. And the conviction there has to be some sort of moral argument. And I think the inner structure of human rights is of course a particular moral theory saying equal and universal respect to all. So I think you don't get a utilitarian justification of human rights, and you don't get a contractual justification of human rights. You need some sort of universal moral theory in behind, either Kantian or Adam Smith or something like that. So, of course, so I think there are different approaches to justify the universal claims and equal egalitarian claims of human rights, but human rights are always rights, and that of course is also a point that is very important for this cultural relation. Human rights, the bearer of human rights are individuals. Even if we have in the general political discussion the talk of the third generation of human rights, where we say the bearer of these rights are communities for development or things like that, or environment, good environment, and so on. But I think that this is it's an unclear using of the concept of human rights. I think if you allow that the bearer of human rights are communities, I don't see a good argumentation for universality and for equality. See, what does it mean that, you see, because what are communities? Peoples, families, claims, and things like that. So there's a lot of questions, and I think, and also some other thing. I think with human rights, we protect the most violated element in human world, and that is the single person in his or her body. Of course, the limits of the body are symbolic ones, because we are more or less beings that construct ourselves in a symbolic sense way, so by speech and things like that. So a violation of us could also more than a violation of our body. But the body is still there, you see, and we are not on earth if our body is not living. So you can have every good ideas, but if your body is not living, then it's over. And maybe I should use No, just to the point of culture. See, Habermas says, by transforming the more abstract declarations and treaties of human rights into particular constitution, then of course you make a cultural interpretation, a more specific interpretation. And that is okay as long as it is in a, let's say, specific space. And this, of course, is more easy if one is looking to those human rights where the main corresponding duties are positive duties. So, for instance, the human right of education. Because what the concrete education means, that of course is very much related to the cultural standards of your society. But there are other human rights, which, of course, all human rights have positive, are related to positive and negative duties. So nowadays we say duty to respect, duty to fulfill, and duty to help or protect. But those where the duty to respect is, let's say, dominant or most prominent, like the right not to be tortured. In this, of course, there is a very smaller approach for giving cultural interpretation a specific group. Because we can't say, hey, in our tradition, in prison, we have very, since hundreds of years, we treat prisoners in this way, and if you think that is torture, for me it's not torture. It's just a cultural affair. You know?
Excuse.
So yeah, so and we have this sort of discussion, you see, and then we say no, and then of course by this there has to be a global discussion, and we transcend the local cultures. So cultures don't have, as Habermas says, a right to be protected as a culture.
Okay, thank you. I see the two voices, but we have only the last 1 minute, so I'm not sure how to solve this problem. Maybe we can listen both questions, and then we'll leave very short time to replay. So we can start with Shaban Salo.
You collect the question and then we have time.
Yeah, sure. I will try to be short. Exactly, I want to focus on this cultural interpretation stuff you mentioned, because it's very important that when we speak about this juridification of human rights, that there is other co-originality, not just the popular sovereignty and the human rights, but he writes in these books about the inclusion of other, about the co-originality of the nationalism and republicanism.
Mm-hmm.
It means that we see that in the same moment when the human rights are juridified in the new states, then these new states are nationalist states, minimally from the point of view of institutional building and legitimacy. It means that this is a very important, I think that this is a form of cultural interpretation of this universal idea. And exactly, I think that this, perhaps he thinks that recently we can uncouple or unpack this nationalism and republicanism. But still, I think that it will be very important to see the connection, as you also mentioned, that it always brings up the question of the state and the membership, who belongs to the state and who belongs to some kind of non-nationalized and post-nationalized state, which is based purely on human dignity and human rights.
Second question.
I think that Chava has exhausted the 1 minute, so because it will be too long, so we can just come back to my question at the latest.
Only a short remark, because the concept of Habermas is using to your question is Verfassungspatriotism, constitutional patriotism, and saying this is a way, of course, especially for the German history, to love the own country by saying we love the universal, let's say, structures, also and very important and mostly. But I think we have a discussion about constitutional patriotism in one of the lectures.
It was cancelled.
Oh, sorry. It was on my list ahead. So okay.
But I think that there will be some free time during the coffee breaks and during the route at the evening and tomorrow. So I will conclude this first presentation, and thank you very much. It was really now I'd ask you for 1 minute for a small break to change the technical problems, and we should consult here something.